History is full of diverse characters, some of whom were positive and others were negative and evil. Let me share with you some interesting characters in history. All the answers are here in this episode about the most terrifying characters of all time. This is Civilicitopedia, and today I will show you some of the most evil people in history who will make you feel uneasy just knowing what they did. Leopold II. This man was king of the Belgians in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Today we will talk about him because of his terrible activities in Africa. He founded the Congo Free State, which was officially independent, and became his personal property for about 30 years. Despite its name, there were no freedoms in the state, and all the locals were basically Leopold II's property and slaves, who did whatever he wanted with them. For the most part, the king of the Belgians got rid of them and did so with savagery. He forced people to work to exhaustion on the farms to get money from selling rubber, ivory, and other Congo riches. And if he knew that someone was not doing their best, he did not hesitate to execute or disfigure them. It was not uncommon for the victim to be slaughtered in front of their family. The atrocities during his reign were of horrifying proportions. The tyrant killed about 15 million people. The population of the Congo Free State was halved, and the whole world despised him during his lifetime. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, or as he was known, Al Capone, put America in a precarious position that could be considered the most famous gangster in history and one of the most evil and dangerous men of all time. In the 1920s, he worked in Chicago, at which time the city was his. Under the guise of furniture trading, he was involved in the illegal sale of alcohol during Prohibition, as well as in gambling activities. Capone is believed to have introduced the concept of racketeering. He waged an all-out war between criminals and won it, with the epic and horrific Valentine's Day Massacre being particularly noteworthy. When Capone cunningly eliminated his rivals, the authorities became aware of his actions. But despite how strange it may seem, they put him behind bars, not for murder, extortion, and illegal activities, but for tax evasion. He was sent to a prison in Atlanta and then to the legendary Alcatraz. At that time, he was still at the height of his fame, so it is not surprising that in Alcatraz he was feared by other criminals. However, in Alcatraz his health began to deteriorate, and he spent the last year of his imprisonment in the prison hospital. After his release, he lived sick and weak in isolation in Florida. I'm sure you all know who Count Dracula is, the legendary vampire from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. But did you know that this vampire had a prototype? Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Dracula, was this prototype. In the 15th century, he was the ruler of Wallachia, which is now located in southern Romania. Officially, Vlad the Impaler was known as Vlad III, but he was not given the name the Impaler by chance. In Romanian, it literally means impaling. This gives you an idea of his favorite form of execution. Dracula would attack anyone for anything. Impaling was accepted as a punishment for any crime, whether the person committed murder or stole a loaf of bread. Dracula dealt brutally with his enemies, taking revenge on traitors, burning down entire villages, and getting rid of all the sick and poor in Wallachia. It is even difficult to count the number of souls this crazy ruler destroyed. Interestingly, such a cruel man was not unfamiliar with charity. He donated money to the poor and distributed money to build churches. Moving on to the modern era. Even in recent history, there have been many terrifying individuals, and Dorothea Puente is an excellent example. She appeared to be a lovely old lady, baking cookies for her grandchildren and watching television, but she was a dangerous lunatic. With nearly 10 victims under her belt, Dorothea's background dates back to the 1980s. At the time, she ran a boarding house that was later dubbed the House of Death. Many people moved in, and Dorothea chose from among them alcoholics, the elderly, and the mentally disabled. She would give them cookies laced with a large dose of sleeping pills, then dispose of them, and cashed their Social Security and welfare checks. Sooner or later, someone had to notice that people were checking into the boarding house and disappearing there forever. In the late 1980s, the police raided the boarding house, and investigators uncovered the horrors she had been perpetrating. John Bokassa, a ruthless dictator. John Bokassa was a dictator who ruled the Central African Republic from 1966 to 1979. His reign was characterized by cruelty and brutality, as he committed numerous atrocities as people. In 1976, Bokassa crowned himself emperor for life in an extravagant ceremony costing millions of dollars. During his time as emperor, his brutality intensified significantly. Bokassa carried out widespread torture and executions against his opponents and was also accused of cannibalism. He and his family lived in luxury while his people suffered from poverty and hunger. In 1979, Bokassa was overthrown in a military coup. He fled the country and lived in exile for several years. In 1986, Bokassa returned to the Central African Republic to face trial for treason and murder. He was convicted of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death. However, his sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment, and he was eventually released under presidential pardon in 1993. Bokassa died in 1996 at the age of 75. John Bokassa remains a stain on the history of the Central African Republic. Heinrich Himmler, a monster among Nazis. Here is another key figure in the Third Reich. Himmler was not strong in medicine, but he was well versed in agriculture. He was an agricultural engineer by profession. However, he went down in history not as a lover of agriculture, but as one of the main monsters. He was one of the main organizers of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, millions of innocent Jews and Roma perished because of this man. In general, all the works of World War II, the most horrific and unimaginable, could only be remembered and imagined on his account. He founded the Death Squad, headed the Gestapo, and established concentration camps. Unlike Mengele, Himmler was still able to be arrested shortly after the end of the war. But the case did not go to trial. While in custody, he swallowed a capsule containing potassium cyanide. Genghis Khan, the Great Conqueror or the Bloody Tyrant. Everyone knows Genghis Khan as the Great Conqueror, the founder of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. He not only united the disparate Mongol and Turkic tribes, but also organized conquest campaigns, thus creating the largest continental empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Danube River, and from Novgorod to Southeast Asia. All this sounds great, but many people forget what Genghis Khan did to all these lands. Glory and influence did not come easily, as his campaigns were extremely brutal. Some of them ended not only with the capture of the city, but also with the complete extermination of its inhabitants. According to scholars, Genghis Khan was indirectly responsible for the deaths of 60 million people. To give you an idea of the scale, in the 13th century, this was between 4 and 12% of the world's total population. That is, he literally wiped out a tenth of the world. Genghis Khan was also fierce in his acts of revenge against his enemies. For example, when the Persians killed the Mongol ambassador, Genghis Khan was enraged and exterminated most of their people. All these details should not be forgotten when remembering the great deeds of Genghis Khan. That's all. Tell me in the comments who is the most evil person in history. Thank you for watching. See you later.